Hello and welcome to the Power Pod. I'm your host, Matthew Cohen, and today I have the pleasure of speaking with Robert Duigan, who is the editor-in-chief of the Cape Independent and a political analyst. Rob, thanks for joining me today. How are you?
Yeah, cool. I'm all right. Thanks for having me on.
No, always my pleasure. So we've got a lot going on with the local elections coming up later this year on November the 4th. And so I thought it would be a really good idea to get you on, given that you've got quite a lot of data and insights for us, particularly when it comes to, I know, the Western Cape, which is, of course, your forte. But then we're also going to take a look at some other parts of the country like Gauteng as well. And in actual fact, Rob, I'd love for us to start off with Gauteng because we saw in a recent by-election how the DA in Mfuleni were able to win, which was pretty much a historic victory because we know that it's a township board, it's a black majority, if not 100% black ward, and there have been little bits and pieces where the party seems to have been able to grow in these sorts of township areas in Gauteng. So I guess my first question would be, do you think that this points to a broader growth for the DA across the province, or is this more of just an isolated incident?
No, I don't think it's isolated. I think it's part of a broader trend. I think, look, okay, so I'll show this table shortly. We can dig into that a bit. But first, I just wanted to show you this, because this graph is this graph shows Mfuleni's the Ward 28 over the years, just the Ward 28. And so, I mean, you can see the trend's pretty clear. DA has been growing a little bit. Yeah. So, look, what I'm pointing to here is that you can just see that it's actually a long-term trend, and that the DA is not doing. They didn't have like a big revolution. They've grown a little bit, and they crossed over. I think they won by 8 votes. Which represents what, like a fraction of a percent. But you remember 3% of the vote went to the South African Communist Party. And I think that an underappreciated aspect of this by-election is what it means for the Tripartite Alliance. Because the SACP launching this kind of mini rebellion means that they have leverage in any kind of renegotiation for terms within the Tripartite Alliance, because they can demonstrate now that in marginal cases, if they run a candidate, they can mean the difference between a loss and a victory. So I think the big deciding factor here is actually the South African Communist Party.
Sure.
But what you do see as well is just that the DA has been growing, and the others have been growing as well, and the EFF has plateaued, and the ANC is on a steady decline. And I think that, it should be seen as normal. Additionally, I mean, the things that I'm looking at over here, the climb that you see from most other parties and the decline of the ANC, a lot of it, I think, is down to voter apathy. So, let's see, what was the performance in 2024? I think that if you're talking about voting age turnout, not registered voters, but percentage of the voting age population that turned out, it's like a quarter to a third of the population are voting. So you're really looking at a lot of the ANC's underperformance is due to just voter apathy amongst the black population. But what it actually means and how you use it to interpret what's going to happen in the upcoming the local government election more broadly, you have to look at a bit more context. So I think long term, you've got an ANC decline. That's to be expected. But the biggest growth is really in other parties, and there's lots of these what Helen Ziller likes calling rats and mice, and one of the big ones that is underappreciated is the South African Communist Party. They took a 3% share in this by-election. And that's bigger than the voting margin between DA and ANC, because that voting margin is literally 8 votes. And that means that what you're really looking at is the SACP sabotaging the ANC's electoral results, which gives them leverage in the tripartite alliance to renegotiate various things behind the scenes. So if they want to drop, if they can always just drop out of the local government elections at the end of the year and give the ANC another couple of points on the dial. So they've got a lot of leverage, and that won't be paid attention to much by most people. And I think that big left conference might be worth digging into. I haven't done that yet because I haven't had time. But I think that might be worth digging into to see what exactly they're kind of trying to angle for. But it might mostly just be ideological fluff and sentiment that they talk about there, and you don't really see what's the machinery that's happening. But I just thought it was worth having a look at that and just sort of saying, well, let's pump the brakes and see what it is. Now, the DA have actually won a black ward before. There's one that they've won, I think, twice in by-elections, and then once in the 2021 general, and that's in Mpumalanga near Doornkop and the Doornkop farm near Middelburg. There's a woman called Anthea Grobler, and I think they try not to talk about it too much because in 2014 she was involved somehow with a scheme to sell plots of land to land invaders for 500 rand a pop. And and the people whose land was being taken were a group of a couple hundred black people who'd gotten their land back from the government in 1994, one of the first beneficiaries of land restitution. So it's kind of something that you don't want anyone looking too closely at. I've had to try to scratch at it, and it's difficult to draw a chart of what happened there because they kept changing the voting district boundaries so much that I couldn't find which ward she was Ms. Grobler was competing in for most of the years, so I had to just leave it. But at any rate, so the DA, it's not as much of a slam dunk as they think. Certainly they did well. I think the appearance of Helen Zille and the other people, the other bigwigs who showed up to help with the by-election certainly helped. They did a lot. They put a lot more resources into it that they are likely to do in the next time that they're running there. So it remains to be seen how they actually will turn out. And by-elections, because there's a lower turnout in by-elections, you get a different result, and it tends to favor opposition parties. But I think, the thing is that everyone sort of seems to think that the general pattern is, okay, the DA is gaining from the ANC in the interior, but they're losing to the PA in the Cape. And I think that's one thing that I also wanted to check. I like throwing cold water on people's sort of big things. I mean, look, in China, one of the big things that you want to look out for is the Vryheidsfront+, because over here, now this is not percentages. These are absolute vote counts. And the dark colors represent 2021 and the light colors represent 2026, the by-election. Trane Ward 57 earlier this year, that's super interesting to look at because, look, Action SA and EFF didn't run a candidate. ANC fell to nothing. The DA, okay, it's a by-election. Right. People don't turn out for incumbents, blah, blah, blah. They retained their seat, yes. But the Vryheidsfront+ actually got more absolute votes than they did in a general local government election last time. That is super significant. That never, ever happens. So I think the Vryheidsfront+ are going to do very, very well in the upcoming elections because what they're doing there is they're demonstrating they can turn out the base. And because people don't change parties that much, turning out the base is the big thing, right? And it's true in almost every election, not only in South Africa, but abroad. People don't change parties that much. So turning out your base is very important. But it's not going to happen. That result, you're never going to see it in Johannesburg. Johannesburg's way too English, way too cosmopolitan. Vryheidsfront Plus are not going to have much of a show in Joburg, which is fine. But I think they could do well in Pretoria, and I think it would be good to have the ANC, the DA, have some oversight from a party that's actually got credibility in terms of checks on corruption and abuse of powers. And then George, the reason I include George and Cedarburg here is that Cedarburg was hailed as like a big thing for the DA, but not much actually happened there. It's completely stable for the DA and the PA, and the PA are gaining votes not from the DA but from the ANC. And from Cedarburg first.
Right.
And you'll see that again in George Ward 17 and 27, which ran on the same day, is that Good and Plaaslike Besorgde Inwoners, both brown identity-centered parties, right? So in the Cape, there's lots of these like local single municipality parties, and they're almost universally coloured, except for in Knysna, where the Knysna independent movement is mostly white English, but that's a different kettle of fish. The DA actually gained in their percentage point score in these two wards combined by 9 points. So even though it was like seen as like, okay, the PA is whipping them, what the PA actually did is they scooped up all of the votes from the brown identity groups, and in a way they actually underperformed. If you look at that, if you look at those two combined pillars here for the Good and the PBI, they could have done so much better. So, so I think people are overrating Gate and Mackenzie by a long streak. If you look at the long-term trends there, and I'm going to stop sharing this for a minute. If you look at the long-term trends for the Cape, there's like this little identity chunk that represents 10 to 12% of the vote. That you get those like brown identity parties like Good, Cape Coloured Congress, PA, and then all the localists, and that's about that's kind of on a ceiling, and so they're not going to achieve like some breakaway success. I don't think they're not converting a lot of black people into their orbit. PA cannot compete in the metro because of beef between Gayton and one of the major gang leaders. So they can't effectively campaign in the metro. So Cape Town itself is Good and Cape Coloured Congress, and the hinterland is PA. That's how you've got to see the Western Cape. So the DA actually don't have that much to fear from them.
Okay, all right, I see. So just to sort of simplify it, because we've taken a look now at Gauteng, so specifically Mfuleni, as well as a bit of Tshwane, and then of course we're taking a look at the Western Cape. I just want us to basically break down by province. So just starting with the Gauteng situation, Rob. So it appears to me, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but it appears to me that what's really important actually, which you've mentioned and nobody else has mentioned, is the SACP. That they seem to be the ones who broke off a piece of the ANC's vote. Yeah. And so it's not really that the DA necessarily is sweeping into the ANC, Action SA, name all these other parties here, insert name here, but rather that they kind of held steady, whereas the ANC fragmented yet again. Is that more or less correct?
Well, look, I think you have to give credit where it's due, and me even, and I say this as someone who tends to be very down on the DA, is that they did fight a good game in that by-election, and so the fact that they upticked more than you'd expect, I think they did. I think they did perform above expectation, just not by a huge amount, and I think that. Look, the SACP, those 3 points they took off the ANC, it's not huge, but it's enough to be a deciding factor in marginal constituencies. And so if they can weaponize that position in a couple of by-elections before 2026, then they have a strong negotiating card internally within the tripartite alliance. and they seem to be very unhappy with Ramaphosa recently. The desire to hold we're at a very anxious point. It's also why the DA's public communication, I think, has grown so brittle, because they can see that a lot of people are seeing the whole Rainbow Nation project kind of fray, but they're also seeing big gains in their power and influence. And they're trying to sort of step over a big gap. And that big gap you can see in the elections is them trying to trade out the white electorate who vote at 2 times the rate of other ethnic groups. So white people represent a chunk of the voters' roll that is, I think it's 1.67 times. Every white vote is worth 1.67 non-white votes on average.
Okay, so basically it's disproportionate that
correct.
that white people are actually a bigger percentage of the voting population than just the regular population.
That's correct. Bigger than their representative chunk. I mean, look, let me see if I can. I'll share my screen again, because I have another bunch of election tables. These are oh, excuse me. Sorry if I talk for a while, my lungs start tickling. Where are we going?
No problem. No, it's actually you read my mind, because I wanted to get your opinion on that, because something that I've noticed very recently, Rob, is actually what you said. Like when I was doing my own research into political party funding, how Naspers, for example, which of course we've got the Media 24 umbrella, they seem to fund everybody, and you have these like overarching groups who seem to fund both the ANC and the DA. So I was just very curious to hear that. And then something else that you said that's really on my mind as well is the sort of PR campaign that's been pushed. And I've also noticed how it seems that for a very long time the DA were kind of focusing on attacking the Patriotic Alliance, but it seems as if the focus has shifted to the Freedom Front Plus. Do you think that plays into basically what you were saying before?
Yes, it is, because look, people do tend to vote by a race quite considerably, and look, the statistics. There's a study that was done at the end of my Manes term by Ryan Coetzee and Tony Leon, where they broke down polling going back to 2000, and I've got a graph somewhere, but for some reason it won't import into the spreadsheet. I've got a graph where I sort of like charted that together with Gareth van Onselen's sort of snapshot from 2024, and the black share of the ANC of the DA vote, the DA's share of the black vote. It's careful, I must remember, because the black share of the DA vote is 14%, but the DA's share of the black vote is 4%. Because you've got to remember which way round you do it. But if you look at the national votes, you look at this. Look at that. I mean, that's from 1994 until 2024. The green is ANC, EFF, and MK added together. The blue is NP, DA, Vryheidsfront Plus added together. The red line is the IFP, and the black is others. So you can see nothing changes. Nothing changes. Okay?
They're really just fluctuating.
Yeah. And then I need to update this one for 2024, which I've forgotten to do. But this is voting turnout. And so the blue is just, the blue is the absolute number of turnout. So the solid lines are absolute numbers and the dotted lines are ratios, right? So the green is the number of people of voting age in the country. The yellow is the number of registered voters in the country, and the blue is the number of people who pitched up to vote. And that's what it looks like. And you're down to what? The red, which is the turnout as a percentage of the voting age population, is way down there in the low 20%. It's like a quarter of the population, it turns out, right? Sorry, not low 20, it's 29 here, actually.
Right.
But it's like one of the things that you're seeing is that black people do not turn up to vote because they're apathetic. They like the sales pitch of the ANC and the MK and so on, but they don't trust them. So it's the ideas are there, but they see that nothing's getting implemented. So they just don't show up, and they don't think anything is going to change because they don't want to vote for the DA. Because if it was like, okay, well, we've shifted how we're thinking, then it would be, oh, we'll vote for someone different. What it is, the thing is, it's not. This is not to say that they'll never vote for the DA, because there might be a consciousness shift, but the DA also has to meet them halfway.
Yes.
The problem with that is if the DA meets them halfway, they end up like Maimane and they lose some of the minority votes that they need. And the question is, like right now, when the white and colored vote, they're looking towards their own. They don't have as much hope in the system as they used to. It's a lot more fragile than it was in 2016. And so if the DA try too hard to bridge that gap and go into, replace the minority vote with a black middle class vote or whatever, there's a chance that they could actually just fall in the gap and not make the jump. So I think that's causing them a lot of anxiety. But I think a lot of people, with the Western Cape, which is their home territory, you can see something cool over here, which is that they do not have to have any fear about the ANC. Like this one over here where I've clustered them together by identity clusters, right? The red is ANC and EFF together. They're making 25%.
But then is that because of the racial breakdown of the Western Cape? That the racial breakdown of the Western Cape is quite different to the rest of the country?
It is, but you've got to remember that during this period over here, where you see the ANC decline, like from 2011 onwards, the black share of the population has grown considerably, and so it's not actually. Look, the DA I've heard this from a number of people in the DA, even people who don't like me, so I can tell that it's genuine. So basically, they've decided the winning formula is actually not to campaign in certain black areas, because when they show up to campaign, it doesn't drive up turnout for the DA, it just drives up turnout. Because all of a sudden they're like, what are you people doing in our area? And then they go and vote against the DA. So that happens a lot. And then a few years ago, they just stopped doing that. And so they've been encouraging voter apathy in certain areas, many black areas, because that's what allows them to stay in control. And you can, if you look at this, it's like the Vryheids van Plus. The reason they're a threat is not because they're huge. It's because the DA's margin is small. Here, there's that 50% line. There's the DA is like cruising over the top of that. Like what we could see is if the Vryheids van Plus make another gain like they did in 2021, right? If they make another gain like that,
yes,
we're looking at the and let's say the PA shaves off another point or two, because most of the things they're winning are from ANC, colored ANC voters, but they do win a bit of DA voters. If between them they eat enough of the DA's vote, then the Vryheids van Plus goes into a coalition and demands a referendum. It's big shit. It's big shit. KZN too. You can see the big impact of the Zulu vote, right? Jacob Zuma comes in there in 2009, and that precipitous drop from 2006 to 2009, that just keeps going. And it only starts to recover like a little bit once in 2016 when Jacob Zuma sort of loses his support, and there starts to be infighting in the ANC. And we're talking dead bodies infighting, right? So that's Senzo Mkhunu versus William Mkhunu. Right. I think 60 councillors got assassinated in that competition there. It's a bloodbath. And so, this decline in the ANC over there is very clearly to do with Jacob Zuma's departure, right? And
right.
I mean, there's another factor over here that I think people are missing, which is in Nelson Mandela Bay, Tshwane, Johannesburg. Now this, Nelson Mandela Bay, and you will see something that you recognize in all four of the metros where the DA became the coalition leader. Nelson Mandela Bay, Johannesburg, Pretoria, and Ekurhuleni. What's in common is that they won big in 2016, they got tried out, found wanting, and then lost ground in 2021. And this is,
Right.
I mean, the reason that
Would you say that the main factor though was Action SA, or is there another reason?
no, it's got nothing to do with Action SA, because Action SA is not a factor is not really a factor in Nelson Mandela Bay. I think what's happening over here is that the coalitions were so chaotic, and this is why that they just absolutely couldn't run the place. I mean, Gauteng is different. If you want to group, Gauteng is such a lovely cosmopolitan place. It's the one place where black people vote in double digits for the DA, right? They're not so opposed to voting for minorities,
Right.
So you can't cluster people in Gauteng by race too much. It doesn't work that well. So you get this kind of pattern where you get charterist versus anti-charterist, and that's how I've grouped them, because that makes more sense. But what's happening over here, you see it in Nelson Mandela Bay and in the northern metros, despite them having very, very different political landscapes. And I think what's happened there is that, and I'm going to stop sharing, what happened there, and like Nelson Mandela Bay, we know in good detail because there was a lot of coverage on like the one of the big old ANC stalwarts, one of the few white ones. They have a guy called Chippy Olver. He wrote a book called How to Steal a City. And one of the things that they learned over there that they only later applied elsewhere was they can actually steal money while not in control of the council. And the way they do that is that they maintain control of the legal department, right, and they tweak evergreen contracts. So they could attack the DA from three fronts: union protests, right, draining the funds through evergreen contract manipulation, and council chaos, motions of no confidence, speaker blocking motions, all kinds of stuff, right? The DA didn't have an answer to this.
Yes.
They didn't have an answer to this stuff. And so when the chaos hit and the ANC started throwing bribes around, you got people crossing the floor. You got Panyaza Lesufi seizing control of Tshwane, putting it under administration. And the thing is that even if you take out the sort of political interference, that is, in the council and so on, Tshwane actually didn't Brink's performance in getting the budget under control hasn't been that good. And I think part of it's due to the fact that he can't fire people who are destroying the civil service. And there are things that you can do. You can hire someone who has the intention to do a clean sweep. And you can hire private investigators, and you can really sort of root out a lot. Because council can't fire anyone who's not senior management. They can only fire and hire senior management. And then senior management has to do the stuff below. It's far easier to protect someone who's corrupt from the council than it is to do anything about corruption. So, for example, and I noticed this with the DA. I mean, look, the ANC are so brazenly corrupt, it's like not interesting to look at, because they're not even trying to use legal structures to protect their members. They're just sort of protecting them by, okay, we're not going to prosecute, or we're not going to get rid of the guy until there's overwhelming political pressure or whatever. DA are different. They use little tricks.
But also, like, the public stopped pushing back, it feels, because the public just knows that ANC's corrupt, and everybody's like, okay, this is a given thing, let's move on. But you were about to say true. The DA, Rob. I'm very curious to hear
I don't think that's true. I don't think that's true. Let me just put it this way. It's not that people have stopped pushing back. I think there's a lot more organized resistance in local communities than people give it credit for. It's just that it doesn't have a magical effect, and the overall mood is just sort of, oh, we expect there to be corruption. So if something happens we don't like, we can assume corruption. Therefore, we can go after them for corruption on an assumption, blah, blah, blah. With the DA, it's different because they have this Teflon reputation that they've managed for years. But if you look closely at like what they do at a local level, like in Midvaal, they had the municipal manager a few years ago was caught in a cash for job scandal. There's a guy called Albert de Klerk. And what happened with him is that you can't just charge him or fire him or whatever. You have to investigate first, and the investigation is in council. And you can't investigate someone who's not employed by the municipality. So he resigns a couple of days before the investigation. And then everyone quietly sweeps it under the rug, pretended it never happened. And he pops up again as the municipal manager of Langeberg. Langeberg residents say, we are not having this crook in our municipality. They were very, very harsh about it. They went up and marched up to the local muni buildings. They say, okay, fine, we're going to get rid of him. We're going to let him go. He pops up in Hessequa municipality. And there's a whole other story over there that's very seedy, millions of rands missing in various forms of corruption that went unpunished. But it gets worse because sometimes they're not promoted sideways. So you look at Memory Boyson, Eleanor Bo-Spies, Conrad Puel, all mayors fingered for corruption multiple times in local areas in the Western Cape. When the heat gets too high, they get rid of them, vote of no confidence. Then they promote them to parliament. So these are now parliamentary members. So with Memory Boyson, the DA went so far out of the way to protect him because he was their first black mayor. And he was recruited over from the ANC, and he had ties to people in senior management in Beta municipality who funneled millions and millions out of the place. Some of them, when they were gotten rid of, were redeployed in ANC councils in the Eastern Cape. So it's like, these things can become long shuffles. But what the DA did is they had the speaker called Johan Brummer. And in 2011, when Memory Boyson first came in, a big rah-rah celebration, our first black mayor, there were already problems within the first 6 months. And Johan Brummer emails Anton Brodel and Helen Zola and says, listen, I can't in good conscience, I'm a good party member. I'm not going to go to the press. I don't like that. I'm not that kind of guy, but please, we need to do something. Here are the problems. Here's the corruption. Silence for a little while. And then they fabricated missing membership dues to the tune of something like 5,000 rand and kicked him out of the party, thus removing him from the speaker's seat. He fought them in court for 10 years, costing the DA 3 million in lawyers' fees alone. And he won because it was fraud. It was fraudulent what they'd done to him, right? So he beat them in court, but this is 10 years later. And it took them 14 years to get rid of Memory Boyson. And in that time, millions and millions were lost. Lots of things went wrong. And now he's in provincial parliament. And this happens over and over again. So the DA are very, very good at managing this. And senior members of the ExCo are always looped in when these crises happen. And for example, there's a crisis in Stellenbosch that I have to be circumspect about how I talk about because I made a big mistake recently there. But I have covered a lot of it. One of the things they did is that they captured they had a mayor who came in from Drakenstein, was transferred over there. One of the local sort of people over here said that they had to remove her because they couldn't control her anymore. A woman called Geesie van Deventer. So she takes over in Stellenbosch as mayor. And what happens there is that one of the first things she does, along with the municipal manager and the head of corporate services, is that they block council's access to anything happening in civil service. They used to have this platform where you could see, everyone's contact details, what they're working on, what their schedules are, when to meet them, and what they did is they made sure that the civil service was closed off by security. No council member can speak to any member of staff under any conditions. They have to ask the municipal manager. They have to ask the municipal manager for access to any documents or anything. And from about 2018, 2019, it was just these three people, the mayor, municipal manager, and the head of corporate services. And the head of corporate services admitted this to me over the phone because she's not very bright. She admitted that they shut this off, and she thought we're perfectly justified because there has to be protocol. And it's like, no, you've placed more secrecy over this tiny municipality than the United States government has over its State Department. And there's all kinds of corruption stories that I have only gotten a tiny taste of. There's an issue with illegal property swaps, which I couldn't really check up on because the AF numbers were actually deleted from the database, which means they know someone at National Records who's helping them. And but like, very deep stuff. And they were also running the property registry improperly in many cases, in a lot of different important properties. Without council oversight, which renders them, illegal. So this became a big problem.
Right.
And then what happened is that Geesie van Deventer allegedly has continued having contact with the current mayor and with the MM who's remained in place. And I wasn't able to find out exactly what that relationship was, although pretty much everyone I spoke to in Stellenbosch told me that there's still contact there. So I'm not sure exactly what it is. But Helen Zille picked Geesie van Deventer to be on the selection panel because, there's steps and whatever, but the chair of the party has the final say, and this is just before she left for her mayoral candidacy. And she picked Geesie van Deventer to sit on the panel that selects the new councillors for the new council for the upcoming elections. So there's you see these little patterns over and over again. And with the DA, it's very subtle. And some of the things that they were covering up were really bad. Like the head of HR, who was the acting head of corporate services after the previous lady went, a guy called Alexander Kannemeyer. He fired all the white technical staff, and he boasted that was what he was doing. And he said, we're going to make their lives difficult, make their jobs difficult. It was, it's illegal terminations under the Labor Relations Act. It's called constructive dismissal. And so the thing is, what happened is that they let him go from his acting Section 56 senior management role, but let him keep the HR role, which is below that Section 56 layer. So the council can't touch him, and this kind of stuff is a big problem. And the DA corruption isn't as bad as the ANC's, but it's more illustrative of the problems with municipal governance, if that makes sense, because they rely on the rules so much more day to day than the ANC do.
No, of course. But there is something else that's really caught my attention, Rob, and it's actually something you mentioned in a previous interview that you spoke about Oatser. Now, we've seen how there was quite a lot of noise, a lot of stuff hitting the headlines because we saw how the DA and the Freedom Front Plus used to work together there, but then all of a sudden there was the change in government, and of course the Freedom Front Plus then went to work with the likes of the Patriotic Alliance and the ANC, and the VF Plus mayor was installed. Could you explain what was actually the reason behind that? And I guess why is there still this sort of feud?
Well, you got to remember this is under Peter Groenewald is much more, how should I say, politically pragmatic. Let's put it that way, than Corneille is. Now, Corneille is not, you can't get what he's got without a little bit of a Machiavellian streak, but I think he's a little bit more idealistic, which I like. This is important when you get to the punchline of this. But what happened in Oudtshoorn is you had the local mayor, Chris McPherson, DA mayor. He was accused of abusing his powers in various ways related to tenders for infrastructure and things like this. And those problems sort of simmered, but it really sort of came to a head when he tried to pass the budget, and then his coalition partners, ACDP, Vryheidsfront, and so on, they said, listen, we don't like this item and that item and this item and that item, so can we please discuss it? And he said, no, screw you, we don't discuss things. That's not how this works. You just do what you're told. You're part of our rule now. And they said, well, that's not on. So McPherson and his guys, they went over to the ANC to get support for the budget. They went across the aisle outside of the coalition. And the ANC support the budget. And so the coalition partners say, okay, this is not on. They launch a motion of no confidence. And the ANC, finding this hilarious as all hell, join in the motion of no confidence. And McPherson is removed. Vryheidsfront Plus approached the DA and said, listen, we like working with you, but please, no more McPherson, somebody else. They say, screw you, we do not negotiate. You are now persona non grata, And they say, well, okay, but we have to have a government. So anyone who wants to come, we're going to hold a big talk on this. And anyone who wants to join the coalition, come. So they form a government of local unity. DA was invited and didn't attend. So they form a government with the ANC, and the DA say, look at them. They betrayed us to go into bed with the ANC. And but they didn't just stop there and like harp on in the public, on the papers. The local caucus leader stood up and she said, we are now going to kick you out of every hung municipality in the province. And they started doing that. Wow. I mean, I think was it in Mossel Bay or was it in Theewaterskloof? I can't remember which one, where they swapped them out for swapped out the Vryheidsfront for the Socialist Revolutionary Workers' Party. Like they were like any Mickey Mouse, whoever. It doesn't matter how radical you are in any direction. If you're not the Vryheidsfront, get in there. We want to punish the Vryheidsfront. So this went on in all kinds of problems. For a couple of years. There was in Swellendam, there was a problem where an ANC councillor came forward and said he was offered 2 million rand by the DA to cross over. How would you did you you pick the only ANC councillor who won't take a bribe in the whole country? And so Swellendam was a big problem because they were in coalition with like a very fiery DA councillor called John van Schalkwyk. And he was going at them hammer and tongs about every little mistake they were making in procedure, every questionable contract. He was being a major pain in the bum for them. And the way that they ended this feud was that a deal was struck behind doors. And despite the fact that he was later vindicated by the investigation, Van Schalkwyk was gotten rid of by the party. They just withdrew him. And everything went back to normal. And very shortly afterwards, I think less than a month later, Groenewald was voted out and we got Cornet. And so I'm not sure if that truce would have actually occurred if the problem was delayed by a month. That remains to be seen. I mean, look, Groenewald's doing good jobs a good job in his department, but I mean, factions, one prefers one over the other. And the thing about this is an interesting thing about the Vryheidsfront Plus that is pertinent to the whole local elections thing. With the resurgence of the DA and the big recent 24 election, the votes that the Vryheidsfront Plus won off them from the Maimane era went back to the DA, but not in the Cape. So in the northern areas, that vote went back to the DA. Okay, coalition, whatever. But in the Cape, the Vryheidsfront Plus pretty much retained everything that they had. There was a tiny sort of incremental drop, but it was a rounding error. They retained their support in the Cape, and I think it's partially due to the fact that it's partially due to Cornet's leadership, partially due to the slightly more robust sort of antagonism that they had towards the DA, and that, okay, here's someone who's holding local government to account. Whereas, in the rest of the country, if you want to hold local government to account, you call the DA because they're bigger. It's just natural, right? So there's a couple of little things that they had going for them there. But also, I think part of it is that in the Cape, the Vryheidsfront Plus have a message, which is we're selling independence. So them being the main vehicle for Cape independence means that, people who are looking for an out can look at them and say, well, look, at least they have an idea for where they're going in the future. And look, the legislation that will allow for premiers to hold referenda, it's already in Parliament because there's a court mandate. The guys at the, what's it called? The Kaapse Forum, that's Heinrich Weingart and co. They pressured the Constitutional Court to make sure that the Parliament is going to pass this Reform Act to align legislation with the Constitution. So sometime before 2029, it's almost certain that the Premier will have the power to hold a referendum in his province. And then you can hold the election in 2029 almost on the basis of that. And people don't vote for policies. They vote for people they think are going to win or they can trust or whatever. So I think even in the best case scenario, you're not going to see Vryheidsfront Plus sweeping the elections in some dramatic revolution. But I think they can win enough to force the DA into coalition. and at least ask the question. And the thing about
Sure.
asking that question is that it is very likely that it's going to win. And if it wins, then you've got now this question: what do you do about it? The whole province wants to leave. Now, you could end up in a situation like Brexit, which I think is quite likely, where the people who want to leave are not in charge, and the people who want to stay are now forced to negotiate the exit. So they sabotage and procrastinate and compromise as aggressively as they can to leave you with the worst deal you possibly can get. I think that's a possibility. You could get, because Jordan Hill Lewis does not like this business at all. He doesn't like this secessionist business. He really, really likes.
But I think that's sort of the DA's overall view, isn't it?
Yeah, but I mean, there's added color to this that's given by local policy. So he entered into local government in 2006 with Helen Zille. He was her protege, and that's where he's been the whole time. He's been working directly under Helen Zille for nearly 20 years. I mean, there's some periods where he's on his own doing his own thing, but broadly speaking, he's been her follower. And the big policy that she brought to Cape Town in 2006 was the Violence Prevention Through Urban Upgrading Program. And the VPUU is a system where they basically said, well, look, what we can do is anyone who's invaded a bit of land, instead of kicking them off, why don't we convert them and, help them out by, why don't we help them out by, giving them free title deeds and utilities connections, and then they'll convert and they'll vote for us. And this precedes the ANC's urban upgrading program by 5 years. So they were flanking the ANC from the left. And for this reason, and I mean, I can show you a graph if I can find it, but I don't feel like hunting for it because I can remember the numbers.
No problem.
The Western Cape is the worst for land invasions in the country. They were number 3 in the country in 2003, right? Number 3 best for formalized housing as a proportion of all housing, right? And now they're dead last. They're the worst rate of informal settlement in the country. And part of this is due to this policy, I believe, because the DA has been pushing it everywhere that they govern. And it means that they're also the only province where, the rate of informality is increasing. Everywhere else it's been falling, even the Eastern Cape. So, yeah, it's really bad. And Jordan Hill Lewis has defended this and said, well, actually, we don't need to enforce bylaws around construction in the township because, well, let them build their rickety multi-story house. They're investing in the local community. But, if you want to have a garage add-on, and your paperwork isn't pashash, you're going to get the boot. So there's this, he's developing this sort of 3-tier economy where the wealthiest get to ignore planning regulations, and then they treat the violations of fait accompli once the construction's in place. The poorest are just, live how you want. We're not going to enforce laws on you. Have at it. Here's some free stuff. And then the middle class are like, well, you better pay up and shut up because we need you as a tax base, but you're also irritating and too weak to actually tell us what to do. So that middle layer gets a lot of pressure. And I mean, people think, okay, middle class, you're talking about this pampered cluster up in Constantia. But it goes down to people who are living on the Cape Flats who get squeezed. And the latest thing that Jordan Hill Lewis has been doing with, what's it called, with that lawsuit that he lost with their special levies.
Yes, the water tariffs, which AfriForum and a few others, SAPOA included, they took it to court and the court found it unlawful.
Correct, because you're not supposed to do the place in which you can do your progressive taxation is through property rates. But if they raise the property rates too much, they lose the advantage that their donors would have in property development in Cape Town. So they have to target the middle class, but they can't squeeze but they can't make the property rates regressive because they couldn't sell that politically. So then their option becomes flat rates for law-abiding citizens that are increased in proportion with your income. So it's like this very convoluted way of thinking, but it would have balanced the books a little bit. But even with the increased income, they're in trouble because they're pumping so much money into these informal settlements they've allowed to grow that they're running multi-billion rand deficits every year, right? So what they did this year in order to balance the budgets is they just flogged all of the city's assets. Like all of the properties and companies that they sold, they started flogging them to the private market on auctions, like the Dromedaris building and all of this, right? And then to plug the last gap, they went to the Treasury and got 400 million rands special grant. So they got the first balanced budget in years by burning the family furniture. Which, I mean, like, fine, if you're a libertarian, you don't think the local government should own anything, fine, whatever. Have at it. But the bottom question remains, like, is what they're doing sustainable? The answer is no. So, yeah, they're in trouble. And if I were them, I would just raise the top property rates. I mean, it's the thing about those big property developments and the demand is you need to actually reduce the pressure on the middle class if you want your economy to grow in a sustainable way, because what you're relying on at the moment is a property bubble, a long-term property bubble. And when that bursts, the whole city collapses. And they're doing other silly things as well, like they're trying to cram in state-subsidized low-income housing in wealthy areas. And one of the places they're doing it is in the city center. Now, the city center had before this program begins, they got less than 5,000 permanent residents in the area. And that allows them to have what they call community improvement districts. Now, that's DA council approved private corporations that then run your public services for you and your private security and your street cleaning and everything. But you need a 60% buy-in, and then their fees are tacked onto your local rates. So now let's say you now overwhelm that district with people who couldn't possibly afford to buy into this program. How do you maintain? Because if you go to Cape Town CBD, you can walk around. You can visit the shops. Nice tourist vibe. Can't do that in Joburg, right? Can't do that in Joburg.
No, yeah, you can't do that.
And part of the reason is because of the city improvement district. It's part of the reason. It's not all the reason, but it's part of the reason. It's a very big one, and they're doing good jobs. You undermine the funding base that allows them to exist, you're going to have a problem, as well as, multiplying the amount of people who live there, who are going to be from, subsidized low income housing. It's really just not well thought through. They're sort of doing these very sort of last minute patches to everything right now. And I think that in many ways it's in trouble. And, yeah, I don't know what to say. It doesn't look good for them. There's 2/3 of the population are in the metro. So, what's going to happen? Sure. I mean, you're already seeing, like, out here in the sticks, you're seeing people from Cape Town moving out, because they can't afford to live there in the city. I mean,
understandably so.
Yeah, even rents out here are getting, like, quite high. So, people are commuting further and further and further distances to deal with the fact that all the free land is taken up by land invaders, and then it's being depressed from the top by foreign property speculation, which is taking up the majority of the top areas in the city. So it's completely unsustainable. Like at every level, there's something has to go, something has to give. You're going to have to chase away some of those property developers. Right. You're going to have to clear out the land invaders at a very, very big scale somehow. And you're going to have to invest in, repair and infrastructure and security a lot. And I think that being part of South Africa puts an absolute barrier on this. And so there's, in many ways, you're sort of heading towards a tipping point, both in the Cape and nationally, where, sorry, my dog's going bananas for no reason. If you don't do something radical about it now, you're not going to be able to fix it. It's not like there's some of these O'Bullies who are in the army. they know what it's like to be in combat. They don't sort of think too much about the deep economics that backs all of them up and the social structure. And so what you get from them is, when it falls apart, it's going to be like Angola. It's going to be like Zimbabwe. It's not going to be like Angola or Zimbabwe. It's going to be slower, and it's going to be very undramatic, and just things are going to get shit quite fast, but not fast enough to like light a fire under your bum. It's just going to be, you won't be able to fix it anymore. So there's a tipping point coming where I think, big decisions have to be made, and Cape Independence is one of the ones I back because it's there. It can be done. Long shot for sure. None of the wealthy elites are actually backing it because they're too invested in the current system, which its failure mode is liquidating the mid-market competition and then allowing the major oligarchs to control that and then liquidate it on their way out of the country. So, like, the failure mode for South Africa in its present system is the disappearance of capital and the destruction of the middle class's assets. And I mean, I've heard from Frans Cronje. He said something very encouraging on the surface, which is that you're going to be totally fine because you have gated communities and therefore none of this decay will touch you. And my counterpoint to this would be that, private corporations are not immune to looting. And the more desperate the economic situation gets,
right,
the more lucrative those remaining sort of islands of stability are. So, if you can't rob Houghton, which you can't anymore, Houghton's starting to fall apart and descend into informal settlements and hijack buildings. What's next? Well, it's gated communities, and you're increasingly seeing home invasions in gated communities. They come in with the machine guns and they hold everyone in the whole little community, to rob them. It hasn't happened as frequently as other forms of violence, but it's starting to happen here and there. So, who will be the most secure? And it's not just that. It's also that the companies that own these are going to become increasingly consolidated as the risks of owning them increase. And as they get consolidated, more and more of them will be BEE, level 1 BEE owned. And the ones that are more BEE owned will be subject to more and more aggressive, restitution policies. Which, Ramaphosa, during this time where he's supposedly working together with private sector in running the government, you'd think you'd all of a sudden get a whole bunch of free market stuff. No, you get more internal protectionism. You get more racial discrimination. You get more barriers. And trade-wise, they're pivoting so fast to China and America's doing so little to them, that there really is no stick at the other end. So it's sort of really down to people in South Africa to decide, do we want to allow the system to keep going as it is and see how much runway we have left before we crash into the acacia trees? Or, do we stop and get off this thing? And the problem is stopping and getting off a fast-moving vehicle.
Back when we were looking at the election data, something that really came to mind for me is that it seems like you don't have a lot of spillover between voter pools, much like you alluded to. You've sort of got your ANC, EFF, MK, all the sort of splinter parties on one side. You've got these sort of other parties on the other. You don't see that much crossover. And even when you were talking about the PA, there might be a little bit of a swing from DA to PA, but then as you mentioned, they seem to be taking off the ANC a lot more and your sort of colored nationalist parties. But then, of course, the interesting thing is that it seems that the Freedom Front Plus is biting into the DA vote in a significant way. And so my question for you, Rob, is when you look at the entire country, say you were the Freedom Front Plus strategist, what would you say are the hotspots? Where is it that the Freedom Front Plus should be targeting?
Well, it would be Tshwane and the Western Cape. So northern suburbs, winelands, West Coast, and Tshwane. Potchefstroom also does really well. But there's not a huge amount you can gain there given the size of the ANC's majority in those areas. So It's good to increase your voice in those areas, but the Vryheidsfront Plus is a good vehicle for it. But I would say that your big problem is that the best role for the Vryheidsfront Plus is as the tail that wags the blue dog. So,
right.
If you're looking for what the Vryheidsfront Plus can do for you, it's that by being the biggest coalition partner of the DA, they can extract concessions from the DA and they can keep them hold them to account. Because I think, look, the DA has a lot of talent. They can run things pretty well, but also that's a byproduct of just where they are. People who vote for them, forget the racial question, just completely forget it. People who vote for them are middle class. They are what Frans Cronje calls the intergenerational middle class. So, I mean, it's not just white people, but it is overwhelmingly white people who are, they've been middle class for a while. They have a certain expectation. There's a community. It has high human development index, also people who are professionals, has a deep tax base. And those two things means that you have good recruitment for your local municipality staffing, right? And you have a good, healthy budget to draw from. And the DA benefit from the fact that they are the default choice in those areas. And people forget that those are things that any party in their area could benefit from. And yes, the ANC would be a terrible idea because they have no moral compunction. They're highly corrupt and they have a very violent and mendacious internal culture. But the option isn't DA and ANC. The option is DA, ACDP, Vryheidsfront, so on. So if you're a minority, what you want to do is you want to put on enough pressure on the DA that they're not too tempted to jump ship into the ANC's voting base. Because if they try and do that too much, we're going to end up in a position where, because they already have a very progressive sort of political culture and they signal conservatism to their voter base because they know that there's a gap, which is normal. In every country in the Western world, the political class is to the left of the average voter and sometimes to the left of the most left-wing voter, as in the case of the UK until very recently, on almost every single policy question. So expect that the DA are far to your left, whoever you are, in the minority bloc. And then just say, well, how do you move them back? Well, you've got to provide a counterweight. And so that's how it works. Because that, the Cape Flats are not going to wake up tomorrow and decide, I'm going to vote for the Boere. That's not going to happen, right? Some of them might, but the vast majority never will. And but that shouldn't discourage you because the Vryheidsfront Plus are perfectly capable of maintaining stable coalitions and cooperating with the DA for long periods of time. That has been demonstrated, but they also hold them to account when it's necessary. So it's a nice balance. It's a really, really good balance, really healthy balance. That's what I think. ACDP too, very, very competent, very professional. By all accounts.
Yes, that makes a lot of sense. Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. It's that counterbalance that you said, because of course coalitions are sort of inevitable in most parts of the country, it seems. And if you've got a party that maybe you feel is going a little bit too left, you have that sort of right counterbalance, and then you sort of meet somewhere in the middle. So it makes a lot of sense.
It's just look. Sometimes there's you have to remember also just that we are a proportional representation system, which means that you are always going to have you don't have to worry about splitting the vote too much. There's ward seats are made up for by a compensatory PR vote. So whatever you lose at the ward level, you gain at the representative level. And that's just, so it's not worth getting too scared about this.
Of course.
Because they're in the same block. They are going to be part of the same coalition.
For people to take away.
Yeah.
Yes, they're still going to be part of the same coalition from what we can see. Exactly. It makes a lot of sense. But yeah, Rob, thanks for your time, and it's very good to have your insights. And for those people who are interested in what you've had to say, where can they follow you and see more of your work?
Well, there's my website, the Cape Independent, but I also do, through that website, I put out these special special publications once a month. The current one is running late, I'm afraid, called Prism. And these are like, in-depth sort of looks at various things. So we've got the first one is on, civic organizations and the Zulu monarchy. Anyone who's opposing the sort of opposition to the current system from outside of the parliamentary system. Then we had oligarchies and cartels, the economic elite. And then we had a history edition, and now we have like a local government edition, which is coming out, but is proving to be a bit convoluted. But yeah, it's like 70 pages. It's like a nice meaty thing, and then you can dip into it over the course of the month. And they're $50 a piece to sort of read. So yeah, works out all right. Okay. That's mainly where you're going to catch me.
Great. No, fantastic. Yeah. Well, I'm sure a lot of people found this as interesting as I did. So yes, be sure to catch Rob over on at the Cape Independent. Rob, thanks very much for your time. Appreciate it.
It's a pleasure. All right. Cheers.
Fantastic. Well, thanks everybody for tuning in. If you enjoyed the episode, please remember to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Until next time, I'm Matthew Cohen, and this is the Power Pod.